What's going on, guys? It's Fantasy Stock Exchange here, bringing you a new installment to the channel we haven't done in quite a while. And that's actually going to be a way too early 2021 fantasy football mock draft. Just a fun exercise. Again, a lot of you have already experienced your championships. Hopefully, you're not running in week 17. And if you are, fix that for next year. But yeah, again, myself, Bush, we've already gone through our championship games in multiple leagues. So we just thought it'd be a fun exercise, rapid fire reactions, see how our mind is right after the season and kind of compare it throughout the offseason on what changes, all those factors. But before we do that, Corey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. We get that initial feeling, right? Because
Yeah.
we can go back in May or June or July and be like, oh, well, Tyler Lockett was wide receiver 15 or whatever on the season. But we have, as of right now, we have that feeling of owning Tyler Lockett, right? Because it's week 16 just passed. We know what it was like to own a guy like Tyler Lockett, and it didn't really feel like he was wide receiver 15. He just had a couple blow up performances. All that kind of stuff factors into something like this. And this is something we can look back on in August being like, okay, how accurate were we? Obviously, things are going to change, free agency and the draft is going to change things. But the initial feeling of being like, if DK Metcalf, for whatever reason, is like a 4th-round pick because he has all these concerns, we're going to probably pick him early in this. And we'd be like, why were we overthinking DK Metcalf? Remember, right after the season, we did a mock draft and DK Metcalf was a super high pick. And we have all this entire offseason to poke holes in his game and all that kind of stuff. That just tends to happen. I think an exercise like this is a good thing to look back on because we know what the product of we're doing this based on the season. We're not necessarily digging in super deep with statistics here. We're kind of just doing this based off of reaction.
Yeah, for sure. And talking about it again, for the rules of this mock draft, this is going to be a half PPR mock draft. So kind of balancing it out. If you guys are in standard, you guys are in full PPR.
And one quarterback too.
Yeah, and one quarterback league. Yeah, obviously. Well, not obviously, but you know what I mean. And yeah, as Corey mentioned, this is just our feeling right now. Not over analyzing anything. Not over saying, oh, this guy's bound for regression. Like, no, this is just plain old fantasy football. But before I do that, gonna hit the intro. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is actually going to be a 4-round mock, and we decided before the video I'd get the first overall pick. You guys are going to see in the screen pop right now. The first overall pick in this 2021 mock draft is going to be none other than Christian McCaffrey, Carolina Panthers running back. I mean, don't overthink this. This is still the cream of the crop of fantasy football. I understand he only played 3 games this year, but if you actually take his points per game splits, basically the same as he was last year, 27.5 half PPR points per game. And this guy... Yeah. I mean, if you look at it from just a football standpoint, okay, he gets the volume on the ground game of a Dalvin Cook with the reception upside of a Alvin Kamara. And those guys are 2 of the top 4 running backs that are going to be going.
That was the RB1 and 2 on the season this year.
Yeah. So, I mean, if this guy plays another full 16, which I'll bet you don't bank on another fluky injury season that he's had this year, this guy's going to finish as the RB1 yet again. I'm taking Christian McCaffrey, not thinking twice about it. This is the key engine of the Carolina Panthers offense. And I don't expect anything to change anytime soon. So
yeah, and you look back on it, Christian McCaffrey has a very similar case next year that Alvin Kamara did this year, right? Because it was the exact same injury. It was a high ankle sprain that derailed him a bit longer than it did for Alvin Kamara, but it was the same injury. And when he came back, he was still the same guy. Before he left, he was still the same guy. We know exactly what Christian McCaffrey is. Even if Joe Brady is hired away or something in the offseason, I'm not concerned because the contract that Christian McCaffrey has, the trust of the offense, Matt Rule has already shown the trust in Christian McCaffrey in the limited sample size that we have. He's the 101. Like, you can't predict injuries in fantasy football. They're going to happen to everyone. You can kind of predict them for guys that are injury prone, and that's not Christian McCaffrey. So, yeah, the easy 101. I don't think it's really even worth overanalyzing because I think it's just a very obvious pick to me. I think the second most obvious pick to me is Alvin Kamara at 102. To be honest, again, Dalvin Cook finishes the RB1. So technically Dalvin Cook would be the obvious pick if you were just looking at this season stats and kind of projecting forward. But Alvin Kamara had a number of situations occur for him to not be the RB1 in fantasy this year. And one of those was Michael Thomas missed a lot of time, and that might not be a good thing for Alvin Kamara because he did receive a lot more target volume when Michael Thomas was out of the lineup. But the offense overall wasn't as good when Michael Thomas wasn't there. Drew Brees also missed a couple games with his rib injury or whatever that he had. I think a lot of factors went wrong for Alvin Kamara, and he still managed to, in my personal situation, win me a championship. So
Yeah.
I think Alvin Kamara is as safe as they come. I expect him to be the exact same guy next year. Latavius Murray's probably still going to be in that backfield. It's going to be the same kind of situation. And when you're at the top of the draft, you need to mitigate as much risk as you possibly can. And there is risk with Dalvin Cook. He has had a series of injuries over his career. He may have, maybe the quarterback situation changes. I don't think Kirk Cousins is going anywhere, but that is a factor. And I guess you could say the same thing about the quarterback situation for Alvin Kamara, but I trust the Saints coaching staff to get the quarterback situation kind of in check compared to the Vikings coaching staff.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Again, I agree to the point that this second pick would come down to Alvin Kamara or Dalvin Cook. I just trust a lot more with Alvin Kamara. You said the injuries. I know Alvin Kamara was actually the one that got hurt this year and last year, but last year. You know what I mean? It basically seemed like he was hurt this year when Drew Brees was hurt. Either way, with Alvin Kamara, if he plays that full 16 and Drew Brees expected again to play the full 16 next year, this guy's going to near that 90, 95, 100 reception mark that simply Dalvin Cook can't give you. But for the third overall pick, the reason why I'm going with Mr. Dalvin Cook, this guy's leading the league in touchdowns. He gets 25 touches per game. We're seeing right now that he's involved on the Vikings offense. He's the crucial part, despite them having Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. I mean, Dalvin Cook is the engine that gets this thing going. In my opinion, he may have a case for offensive player of the year simply because of what he does. Again, he's leading the league, or second in the league in rushing. He's leading the league in rushing touchdowns. He's still involved in the passing game. I mean, he's kind of the best of both worlds. He's not going to give you the reception upside of a C-Mac or an Alvin Kamara, but he's going to give far more, in my opinion, than what even a Derrick Henry would do. Again, this was a close matchup, if you will, between Henry and Cook, but I'm just going to go with a much more safer game-to-game option. Again, we kind of saw even this week in championship week, if things don't get going for the Tennessee Titans offense right away, Derrick Henry could be phased out of games. I just don't see that type of case happening for a guy in Dalvin Cook, because even if the Vikings are losing, he's still going to get the reception work. He's still going to get touches in other avenues of the game. I just don't think that Derrick Henry can really give you that type of output, although I do think he's a clear 4 after Dalvin Cook. So I'm assuming that's where you're going for 4?
Yeah, I am going to go with Derrick Henry at number 4. You mentioned it. He is a game script dependent running back, and yes, they really will stick to Derrick Henry even if they are losing. But there's 1 or 2 games a year where he does get phased out of the line, out of the game plan. We actually saw it in Week 16 against Green Bay. They got down early. They weren't going to Derrick Henry as much. It wasn't as effective. So they kind of phased him out of the script. They had to pass the ball out of necessity. And that it's kind of nitpicky for a guy like Derrick Henry, who's basically just a flawless fantasy player otherwise. But that's what you got to do at the top of the draft. These guys are all elite fantasy options. And Derrick Henry, because of his lack of involvement in the passing game, as well as the potential chance that he gets game script out of 1 or 2 games a season, and the potential, I think, that Arthur Smith is no longer the offensive coordinator there. I think there's a good chance that he gets a head coaching job because of the job that he's done the past 2 years with Ryan Tannehill, with Derrick Henry, with A.J. Brown, the development that they've seen from guys like Jonnu Smith and Corey Davis, who looked like a cast-off for the past couple of years. That's going to be enough that potentially gets Arthur Smith hired away, and that's a thing that you have to think about. And we'll go over all the coaching changes and all that kind of stuff as the offseason goes along, but that's enough for Derrick Henry to be a firm number 4 behind those other guys mainly because of the receiving usage, but the other factors as well.
Fully agree. I'm going to mention the 5th overall pick. And if you guys know by now, we've always stressed, you got to take your running backs early. This is the one exception next year. Devontae Adams, 5th overall pick. I mean, this guy is an absolute menace. If you have him in a half PPR league, he's averaging over 22 points per game. If you have him in a full PPR league, this guy's averaging nearly 26 full PPR points per game, which is just unheard of. If you want to just grasp at that, okay? Tyreek Hill, who's going to be another first-round pick for next year, he's averaging 5 more points per game than the next highest receiver. It's just ridiculous what he and Aaron Rodgers have been able to do this year. If you guys haven't watched any Green Bay football, well, let me just say, this guy has over 1,300 yards and 17 touchdowns, despite missing nearly 2.5 games.
Ridiculous.
That's insane.
17 touchdowns in 13 and a half games is ridiculous. Yeah. That's absolutely absurd. And I tweeted this out. Maybe you can put this on the screen right now. I don't know if you will or not, but basically what I said going into last year, we were like, okay, so the passing game was had a down year in 2019, right? There was only like Michael Thomas finished as the wide receiver 1 last year, but he would have finished as like the wide receiver 5 or 6 in 2018. And basically the reason was because of touchdowns, right? A guy like Davante Adams last year missed more time than he did this year. And we only saw 2 players in the entire fantasy season last year, weeks 1 to 16, score double-digit touchdowns. And it was Kenny Golladay and Mark Andrews. Cooper Kupp had 10 touchdowns on the season, but he scored in week 17, which for me and Danny, we don't play fantasy in week 17, so that didn't mean anything to us. But this year, 8 players scored double-digit touchdowns from week 1 to 17. And not only did they score double-digit touchdowns, Davante Adams scored 17. Tyreek Hill scored 15. Adam Thielen scored 14. Mike Evans scored 13. Travis Kelce, 11. Metcalf, A.J. Brown, and Robert Tonyan all scored 10. So the passing game saw a big-time bounce back this year, and that was the reason that we were all down on receivers last year. The reason we were all taking 14 running backs in the top 16 picks was because we were down on receivers from the previous year. I think this year it's probably going to adjust itself, and we're going to see a lot more receivers, potentially tight ends as well, going in the first round and going in the first couple rounds. I think it's going to be a bigger balance than it was last year.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Again, we're going to talk about the rest of the first round, and I can tell you, last year, the only 2 receivers that you're even talking about in the first round, or heck, even 2 non-running backs you're talking about in the first round, were some mixture, in my opinion, of Michael Thomas and Davante Adams based on ADP. This year, we're going to talk about Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, maybe even at the end of the first round. Who knows? We'll see for this mock draft if it's Stephon Diggs, DK Metcalf type sneaks in. This year, there's just so much parity around fantasy football to the point that you don't have to bang on running backs early because there's going to be values later in the draft. Last year's 3rd round running backs, you were talking about like Todd Gurley and David Johnson, Melvin Gordon. This year, we could be talking about guys like Dave Montgomery, Joe Mixon. Like the outlook of those guys is just so much more like lively compared to what we were even talking about last year. So yeah, I mean, I fully agree. Like we're going to see a lot more of an even distribution of these receivers. Last year, if you took any between rounds 4 and 7, you were living in the good zone. This year, that value just may not be there because people are starting to realize that some of these
I still think it will, to be honest. I think the depth of the receiver position around the league will probably dictate that rounds 4 through 7 are still pretty good for receivers, and it might still be a popular draft choice to draft running backs early, but I don't think it's going to be as cut and dry as it was last year. It was just so obvious that you needed to draft running backs early. Everyone and their mother was drafting running backs early last year. And even though a lot of them got injured, it still proved to be the smarter decision in hindsight because guys like Alvin Kamara and even guys in the 2nd and 3rd rounds, Aaron Jones, Chris Carson, like those guys actually did come through for people. And if you drafted guys in the later rounds, like, I mean, David Montgomery and Ronald Jones were good mid-round running backs, but outside of them, Todd Gurley was good for a while, but he didn't last the whole season. David Johnson, same thing. Yeah, it just proved to be the much better option. And speaking of wide receivers, I'm taking Tyreek Hill at 6. I think him and Davante Adams are in a tier of their own in terms of they're attached to elite quarterbacks playing elite football. And I still think Aaron Rodgers next year, I know Jordan Love is there. I don't think that matters at all. I think Aaron Rodgers is still potentially not at like a touch, like once we get into regression stats and all that kind of stuff. There's a chance Aaron Rodgers doesn't have as good of a season as he has this year. He could potentially be the MVP, but Tyreek Hill is as safe as they come in terms of his offense, his involvement, his quarterback play. You know Tyreek Hill is getting the ball, and he has a chance at double-digit touchdowns, as we saw this season. And that's what separates Adams and Hill from guys like Stephon Diggs and guys like DK Metcalf, is that they are locks for 12-plus touchdowns if they play 14 games.
Yeah, I fully agree. Again, the consensus wide receiver 1 and 2 going into next year, in my opinion, I don't think you can make a case otherwise. It's going to be Adams and Hill. Now, the order of those two may be talked about. I still think like Adams has to be the one given what he's been able to do this year, but Hill has made every bit of case to be that mid first rounder going into next year. So I fully agree. Tyreek Hill would have been my pick as well. You're going to be shocked, but the next pick.
I know who you're going to pick, and it's wrong.
It's not wrong because it's going to be his teammate. It's going to be Travis Kelce.
Oh, okay. All right. Never mind. I thought you were going to go a different direction.
Oh, you thought okay. I think I know.
Yeah. So by the way, for those of you that don't know, we're actually doing this live. We don't know who we're going to pick. We're not doing this like we didn't already do this, and we're just going through our picks. We're actually doing this live. So, and while we've got you paused for a second, go down, hit the like button, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, hit the bell icon, but get into the 7th overall pick here.
I'm going to be talking about Travis Kelce, tight end from the Kansas City Chiefs. And I understand there's a stigma around taking tight ends early. I fully understand that. Me, myself, I have trouble even like comprehending a tight end in the first round. But Travis Kelce is no ordinary tight end. Travis Kelce is a tight end right now in half PPR who's averaging 17.5 points per game. Guess what wide receiver that would be?
3.
Yep. After Hill and Adams. And that just goes to show his overall positional advantage. Heck, Darren Waller and George Kittle are phenomenal options. You want to know the difference in points per game between them and Travis Kelce? Over 4. Over 4.5 PPR. That just goes to show you that Travis Kelce, linked to the best quarterback in football, the focal point of the offense. I know Tyreek Hill is phenomenal as well, but in terms of targets, in terms of receptions, Travis Kelce's the main read. I mean, this is a tight end who's on pace for 1,500 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns. That is just insane to even grasp that at the tight end position. Broke the league record in receiving yards this year amongst the position. Double-digit touchdowns. We talked about it all last offseason that if Travis Kelce is able to play that full 16 and has some type of positive touchdown regression, he may just break records.
And that's why we were so adamant that Travis Kelce was the clear tight end 1 over George Kittle. And to be honest, that you talked about the gap between Adams and Hill as the wide receiver 1 and 2. It's even bigger for Kelce and Kittle, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Travis Kelce's points per game number is like having Stephon Diggs in your tight end spot. Basically, that's exactly the type of points per game number that he's been putting up. And I totally agree with the pick. I'm not sure I would take Travis Kelce this early. I think he deserves to go this high. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility or a bad value by drafting him here. I personally don't think I would draft him in the first round. I think I'd need to get him at the 1-2 turn to draft him. But I definitely think in terms of value-based drafting, if you look, Fantasy Pros talks about it all the time. Value-based drafting, Travis Kelce was worth a first-round pick this year.
Yes, absolutely. Heck, he was worth a mid-first rounder if you actually look at the point differential you're talking about there. And
the same thing applies for him, too, as it does for Hill. You know his situation is ironclad. He has the best quarterback in the league. He has the best play caller in the league. His offensive line, even last year, or this past year, was not intact. LDT opting out of the season, injuries to Mitchell Schwartz and Eric Fisher. There's a chance that the offense gets even better. Right?
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes was only the QB3 or QB4 in fantasy this year. There's a chance I think all of us would probably have him ranked as the QB1 next year. There's a good chance he finishes as the QB1, and he's basically a lock for 35, 40, 45 touchdowns every year. So Travis Kelce, I have absolutely no problems. The only thing that can derail Travis Kelce is if he gets injured, which has not been an issue for him.
No, he's been the tight end, the what? Or tight end 1 with what?
5 years. 5 straight years.
Yeah, 5 years.
Yeah.
And obviously, again, we're both of the same idea. Like, you want to hammer those skill positions, running back, receiver early. But when I'm looking at it, I mean,
this I would do. I would take him this early in a 10-team league or an 8-team league, because the advantage that you have with Travis Kelce and the replaceability of the other positions in a smaller league with less people in it, less roster size, all that kind of stuff. That's when you would take a Travis Kelce in the first round, in my opinion, because that way you have the huge positional advantage. That's also why you would take quarterbacks earlier in those kind of leagues as well, is because everyone's going to have good teams. There's going to be guys like Brandon Ayuk and T. Higgins and all those kind of stuff, or all those kind of guys that can supplement your wide receiver position if you need a flex spot, or if you have a wide receiver injury and you need to supplement that. There is not going to be a Travis Kelce on the waiver wire. It's just absolutely not going to happen.
Not a chance. Yeah, and again, like I was talking about it, the rest of the board, like he's just by far the safest option left. Like, yeah, I know you're going to get into Saquon Barkley in a bit. He's coming off a knee injury or right off the season. We don't know how that's going to progress. Nick Chubb doesn't have the receiving upside to really like supplant a guy like Travis Kelce here. And you're talking about the rest of the receivers. Again, heck, Travis Kelce averaged more points than the rest of the receivers on the board. So why would I take any of them over him? So Travis Kelce here, lock him in. Happy with the pick and excited. I know taking the tight end early is hard to gulp, but when it's Travis Kelce, don't worry about it.
Yeah, and you said Saquon Barkley. That's my pick. At 108, 108, yeah. 108, yeah. I'm taking Saquon Barkley. I actually consider taking him at 106 over Tyreek Hill. I think Tyreek is just too safe to not take at 106. Saquon Barkley has his own concerns, right? He's coming off of an ACL injury. He has an offense that is not really the greatest in the world. They're probably going to add a receiver in the draft, if I had to guess. They're going to have a top 10 pick unless they win their division, which, I mean, is still in play for them. But I think a Jalen Waddle, a Devontae Smith, a Jamar Chase, whoever is on the board for them is very much in play. They need receiver help. I think it's their biggest need on their team. I know they have needs on defense and stuff, but their defense played good this year. If they had a competent offense, they need to give Daniel Jones every shot that he can to be a franchise quarterback. Daniel Jones has shown flashes of being a franchise quarterback. He's not done it consistently, but he also hasn't had that great of help. I was high on Darius Slayton for a period of last offseason, but he's not a number one receiver. He's a complimentary receiver. You need a number one receiver, whether it's going out and signing Allen Robinson or signing Juju Smith-Schuster or signing Chris Godwin or something, if that's not on the table, then you need to draft a receiver. That's basically the only option you have, because you need to see your number 6 overall pick have a chance to succeed. And he didn't have a chance to succeed this year. He had his left tackle opt out at the beginning of the season with Nate Solder. He's probably gone. And you trust Andrew Thomas going forward, and you move Matt Pert to right tackle, and you have a young offensive line, a young offense that can bud together. And this Giants team has a chance to be good next year if they do it correctly. And Joe Judge is the man for the job. They have talent on offense and defense. I think Saquon Barkley's outlook is going to be severely, severely overanalyzed. I think everyone is going to be like, man, but like, what about the offensive line? What about this? What about that? Christian McCaffrey does not have a perfect outlook. That's just all I want to point out. His offense is not the greatest in the world. He doesn't have the greatest play caller in the world. He doesn't have the greatest offensive line in the world. But why does he get it done? Because he's so freaking good. He gets so much usage. And that's what Saquon Barkley gets when he's on the field. So I'm going to go with Saquon Barkley at 108. I think there's a chance. He has as good a chance as any to finish as the RB1 on the season.
Yeah, no, I agree there. I don't think
he definitely has risk, though. I'm not gonna say that he's not risky. He's definitely risky. He is this year probably what Dalvin Cook was last year.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I definitely from an upside perspective, you're never gonna get Saquon Barkley at the 8 ever again in fantasy football. Like, it's just never gonna happen. Like, if this guy's coming into a season healthy, he's gonna be a top 3 or 4 lock. And if he was coming into next season healthy, we can even argue him over Derrick Henry, to be quite honest, because of the reception upside. So I understand the pick. I don't know right now if we forced to head into a mock right now, if I would have the cojones.
I think there's a chance that we look back on this in July and August and like, oh man, we only had Saquon at 108. Like, I think there's a chance they add enough that we're really confident in Saquon's outlook going forward. Maybe they even bring in a backup quarterback to compete with Daniel Jones. If that's the case, that even adds even more safety, I think, to Saquon. Because I think the only chance of Saquon not being good is him not being healthy, which, I mean, ACL tears are more routine than they were a couple of years ago when Adrian Peterson came off of an ACL tear and rushed for 2,000 yards. And Daniel Jones just ruining this offense is the other concern, right? So I think the offense should be better next year. I think that's my faith in Saquon, is the fact that him being there, 1, makes the offense better, and 2, the fact that they're going to add to it, and potentially Daniel Jones getting better is the other thing to it. So let's get into the 109.
Yeah, for sure. Again, this is another one that may come as a shock. May be looking back on it and say, hey, this guy's probably going to end up going earlier, like the later we get in the offseason. 109, I'm going to take Jonathan Taylor. I know the stigma around him. We were talking about how, this guy looks like a bust halfway through the season. This guy's not going to return value ever. But man, that second half, week 10 on surge that we've seen from him has been special. And the reason, again, the guy that we compare him to is Nick Chubb. The reason why I'm actually taking him over Nick Chubb is the reception upside. I mean, Nick Chubb, 16 receptions in 11 games. Jonathan Taylor was able to produce 35 and 14, despite realistically not really getting a future or feature lead back type role till week 10, where he was efficient. Like, okay, he got it a few weeks, like from week 2 to week 6, but he really got phased out at the middle of the season. We were all like, is Nyheim Hines the guy there? Is freaking Jordan Wilkins shipping him? But no, Jonathan Taylor proved down the stretch, he just turned it on as a running back. The overall efficiency from a touch standpoint between earlier in the season and later in the season is just absolutely absurd. He went from Trent Richardson to Nick Chubb over the course of the season. You don't ever see that. Okay. This guy was forcing 37% missed broken tackle rate across his last 4 weeks of the season.
He was down at the bottom of the NFL prior to that. Like, before he was forcing all these missed tackles and all that kind of stuff, he was down with guys like Mark Ingram and Frank Gore and Le'Veon Bell and guys that are just completely over the hill. They're at the back end of their careers and they're kind of just good for short yardage at this point in their careers. Jonathan Taylor was playing like them at 22, 23 years old. And that was the concerning thing for us, because I had him as RB1 going into the draft. You had him as RB1, I believe, going into the draft. We were all so high on Jonathan Taylor, and it looked like it was going to be another Wisconsin running back gone wrong in the NFL. And that was not the case, at least that we saw in the back half of the season. Not only did he get the usage, he looked the best on the field. He looked like a dominant running back. And you can bet your ass that this Colts offense is going to get a new quarterback, and that can only help Jonathan Taylor going forward.
100%. Again, like if you're taking just what they did off this season, obviously Jonathan Taylor wouldn't be the 9th overall pick. But the whole point about fantasy football is projecting what they did in 1 year, potential growth going into next year. And Jonathan Taylor, as much as we want to harp on how quote unquote bad his rookie season was, he's still a 1,300 yards from scrimmage, double-digit touchdown running back, despite splitting the load for some of the season. So if this guy gets the full reins for next year, which we fully expect, given like what we've seen due to the tendencies over these last 4 or 5 weeks, I mean, this is going to be a 250 to 300 touchback who can flirt with 15 touchdowns. And if that's the case, you're getting that at 9th overall. That could prove to be a steal. So I'm all in on Jonathan Taylor here. I didn't expect this at the middle of the season, but he proved me wrong. So cheers up, Jonathan Taylor, 9th overall pick here.
Yeah, and just 2 things on Jonathan Taylor real quick. He finishes the RB10 in half PPR points per game this year. So, I mean, obviously you didn't like the road to get there because it was up and down and complete dichotomy of 2 different halves of the season. But he finishes the RB10 in half PPR points per game. So, I mean, even in last year's season where he was not the guy the whole season, plus Marlon Mack is a free agent, which we didn't mention. So he's not going to be back. Maybe they add a guy to work in, but I think it's just going to be Taylor and Hines next year for the most part. And we've already seen that kind of split, and it can only get better with a quarterback upgrade behind center, which, I mean, I don't think Phillip Rivers has played terrible the past couple of weeks, but I think they could use an upgrade. And to me, Matt Stafford is the dude. Like, get Matt Stafford, please. Yeah, get him out of Detroit, get him into, or even Carson Wentz, get him out of Philadelphia and bring him into with Frank Reich, the guy he had the MVP caliber season with. I think that can only serve to obviously help Jonathan Taylor more and more. You talked about Nick Chubb. That's my next pick. I think I'm going Nick Chubb at, what are we at, 110 here? Yeah, I'm going Nick Chubb because basically the same thing we can say for Jonathan Taylor is also applicable for Nick Chubb. He has an offensive line that is just elite at run blocking. That is the case for the Cleveland offensive line. The offense is going to get better, in my opinion, just because it's the second year of Kevin Stefanski. We saw the difference between the offense early in the season where it was all Nick Chubb and all Kareem Hunt to the balance that they showed the second half of the season, even without Odell Beckham Jr. We don't really know his status if he's coming back to the offense or not. But I think part of the reason Baker played so well, I don't think it's as simple as Odell's not on the field, so he doesn't have to focus on feeding a number 1 receiver, because that's going to be a narrative this offseason about Odell, about Baker, all those kind of things is going to happen. I think the offense got better because they were more comfortable in it. I think that's the reason that it got better, and that can only continue to happen next year. Nick Chubb, I talked about Jonathan Taylor. Nick Chubb was the RB5 in points per game. He played 11 games, RB5 in points per game. I think he absolutely deserves to go this high in the draft.
Oh, absolutely. Again, those were the 2 main options for me at the 9. The reason I preferred Taylor was the little slight uptick you should see in receptions. But Nick Chubb, from a pure runner standpoint, it's him and Derrick Henry in the league. I mean, this is a guy who, if he plays a full 16, is a lock every year for 1,500 rushing yards and double-digit rushing touchdowns. And getting that at the back end of your first round is invaluable. So I completely agree with the pick. That would have been my next guy, pretty much locked and loaded. So, I like the pick. The next guy I'm going to talk about is going to be.
I'm interested to see who you go with here because it's caught between 2 guys for me.
That's where I'm at, and I don't know if the second guy for you is probably not going to be the same as me though.
No, it's not.
This is 11th pick, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so with the 11th overall pick, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to take my guy, Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, the complete disrespect that we're seeing around him is ridiculous. Like, okay, this is a guy who lost all 5 members of his offensive line at some point in the season, including his 2 all-pro tackles for the whole season, lost his starting quarterback after the 5th game, and was still an RB1 in points per game. It's just insane to wrap your head around this guy's watch. Like, maybe he's not the same breakaway running back we saw in 2016, but this is a guy, when the situation doesn't unfold to the degree that we saw this year, is a top 5 fantasy football running back. He was the top 5 fantasy football running back from 2016 to 2019. And when Dak was healthy this year, averaged 20 half PPR points per game, which would have been the RB3. Now, the reason why he's even falling to this point, obviously, because people want to drive the narrative that he's washed, drive the narrative that Pollard's better than him, drive the narrative that, oh, well, he's an overpaid running back on a team that's going to throw the ball. Well, I'll tell you, if the Cowboys stay healthy next year and Dak Prescott is healthy, this is going to be one of the top 5, and that's a baseline here, scoring offenses in the league. We saw earlier in the season when Dak was healthy, what Zeke was contributing in the passing game, what Zeke was contributing in the touchdown game. I mean, this guy had 6 touchdowns in the first 5 weeks of the season. He was dynamic as a player, like not from a breakaway standpoint, but from a consistency, usage, volume, touchdown, and even reception standpoint, like this guy was phenomenal. He's averaging 6.4 targets per game when Dak was healthy. So he can't slip anymore to me. The fact that I'm even getting him here personally as a back end first round pick for a guy I fully expect to resume as a high end to middle end RB1, I think is invaluable. So I know that wouldn't be a guy that you would consider, but Ezekiel Elliott, I can't handle any more disrespect. This has to be the spot for him.
I'm not out on Zeke Elliott. I think it's the situation is ironclad, right? Like assuming Dak Prescott is back, and I think he will be, that we know this offense is going to score points. We know Zeke Elliott is a goal line monster. He gets all the goal line work in his offense. He's good at it, and he'll get all that kind of stuff. So what you can expect out of Ezekiel Elliott at the bare minimum next year, I think, is what you got out of Todd Gurley for the first 10 weeks of the season. That's assuming Zeke Elliott is absolutely washed and cooked like Todd Gurley is. I don't think he's at that point, but I do think he has slowed down a bit. That's why I favor someone like Nick Chubb over him, because I think Nick Chubb is just a better player than him. And fantasy football at its core is just picking good players. And I don't really have any question marks about Nick Chubb's talent. I don't really have any question marks about his situation either, to be honest. But Ezekiel Elliott, I do have question marks about his talent, which is why I put him behind guys like that. And a guy that I would take ahead of him is Aaron Jones, who I'm going to take right now. And
I can't agree with that.
I'm taking Aaron Jones, and the reason I'm taking him is because the offense is just as good. It's just as good. He has Aaron Rodgers playing quarterback, who's played just as good as Dak Prescott has played this past year. And I think the offensive line is just as good. I think Devontae Adams on the outside is enough attention drawn away from him. And I think Aaron Jones, the tiebreaker for me, is the fact that Aaron Jones is more involved in the receiving game. Yes, Ezekiel Elliott is more involved on the ground, and he gets more dirty carries than Aaron Jones. But Aaron Jones, to me, the receiving volume he gets,
he has more receptions than Aaron Jones this season, despite Dak Prescott getting hurt.
Okay, but what kind of receiving volume does Ezekiel Elliott get? Checkdowns or down the field targets and red zone targets?
I mean, 49 for 319, and over the first 4 weeks of the season, I said 6.5 targets per game. That was actually 6.5 receptions per game. So I know earlier in his career, we talked about Zeke as being like he didn't have the receiving upside. Like back in the day, we were debating like Le'Veon Bell or Ezekiel Elliott, who should be number one. It was Le'Veon Bell because he'd get more receiving volume. Ezekiel Elliott this year.
I'm not saying he doesn't get receiving volume. I think what Aaron Jones gets is very valuable receiving volume because he has Aaron Rodgers, who one doesn't use other players on his team. He just wants Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones and now Robert Tonyan. He just wants those guys. He doesn't care about anyone else. So he has the trust of his quarterback. Obviously, he was leading the NFL, not running backs, the NFL in red zone targets for the first 6 games of the season, which is ridiculous for a running back to be doing. So I think the receiving volume combined with the fact that I think he's a better player again than Ezekiel Elliott, and he also gets goal line work as well. So I just think all those factors, the situations are very similar. I think that puts Aaron Jones slightly above Ezekiel Elliott for me. I've cooled down a bit on saying I'd take Ezekiel Elliott not until the 3rd round. I think I would take him in the 2nd round, high 2nd round. But I do think there is a number of guys that are ahead of him, and Aaron Jones is one of those guys for me.
Respectable. Again, I would still prefer Elliott, but I mean, Aaron Jones is a phenomenal pick, and he has every right to be a top 15 first round type player because let's be honest, the narrative in the fantasy community going into next year is going to be, AJ Dillon take over. Aaron Jones not getting brought back. He's a third, 4th rounder. Yeah, no. If he's back on the Packers, it's going to be a top 15 pick, and he has to be. And if he's not, you take that.
I think he gets franchise tagged. That's basically what the pick. The reason I'm making this pick is I think he gets franchise tagged.
For sure. Talk about the next pick. It's actually really going to come down to 3 guys mostly for me. It's going to be one of the receivers and Metcalf or Diggs, most likely Diggs, or I'm actually going to go with the running back here. Got to take Austin Eckler. Got to take the boy Austin Eckler. I mean, we forget how dynamic of a player he is just because he got hurt this year. But man, I'll tell you, if there's a 3rd best receiving back in the league, it's Austin Eckler. I mean, we figured the first 2, obviously Kamara and McCaffrey, but if anyone's going to compete with them from a target, from a reception standpoint, it's going to be Austin Eckler. I mean, what this guy has done this year in the games he's played, 512 rushing touchdowns or 512 rushing yards. The main knock on him would be the rushing touchdowns. He does everything apart from just overbearing in terms of touchdowns, if you will. So I don't understand why half the fantasy community wants to think he's trash when this guy's averaging 14 half PPR points per game, despite being knocked up during games, despite fucking Kalen Ballage was getting some touch. No, Austin Eckler is going to be the guy next year because he was when he was healthy this year. And I wouldn't expect anything different. I mean, don't overthink it. Take a talented player. Austin Eckler is a talented player. This guy, if he plays the full 16 next year with Justin Herbert, he should be flirting with that 80, 90, 100 reception mark, as we talk about with Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. So have no problem here. Take him at the end of the first round.
Yeah, and basically what we talk about with drafting safer players, and again, there's no safety in fantasy. Anyone could tear their ACL the next game that they play. But when we talk about safety, what contributes to safety? It's situation. And the biggest knock on on Austin Eckler for people, not us, we were high on Austin Eckler, but people that weren't us, was the situation last year. They didn't think the Chargers were going to be very good. They thought Tyrod Taylor was going to be starting the whole season for some inexplicable reason. But we've seen they got a truck. If you guys are not familiar with the truck and trailer theory, Justin Herbert carries that offense. So yeah. Justin Herbert being the quarterback of that team very much upgrades a guy like Austin Eckler because, one, we've seen his propensity to throw to Austin Eckler a lot, and two, the offense is going to score more points than it would have if Justin Herbert was just some average quarterback like Daniel Jones or something like that, and we had question marks about how good he was. We know Justin Herbert's good. He just broke the rookie touchdown record, and I think he's going to be even better next year when they add maybe some pieces to the offensive line, when he has a full offseason to actually work with his receivers and with his new coaching staff, which I anticipate they have. It's all going to depend. Austin Eckler's situation is definitely dependent on what happens in the offseason, but I think back end of the first round pick is his floor, in my opinion. I think that's where his floor should be because of the situation that he has.
Heck, you're talking about a guy like people want to just forget how good he is as a player. Talking about a guy in 9 games this year and left a game early with the Tampa Bay game. He had 48 receptions in 9 games, not even 9 full games, basically 8.5 games because he left started the second quarter against Tampa.
Yeah.
Like this 48 receptions.
I didn't think so the first quarter.
48 receptions in just over 8 games is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Yep. And people want to just pretend
and
like
if you take away the first game he played with Tyrod Taylor too, he didn't have any targets in that game, or he had like 2 targets or something like that. Yeah. And if you just take his games with Justin Herbert, it's even better of a pace. So I think, like I said, Justin Herbert throws to him. And the reason is because he's really good. And that's not going to change anytime soon.
For sure. Hammer it in. Austin Eckler.
All right. So we're starting off the second round. We're going to probably go through second and third round. We're going to do the first 3 rounds. We're going to go a lot faster in the second and third round. It's the first round of the fantasy draft next season. We figured we'd give you more analysis for that. But to kick off the second round, I might go with a shocker here, to be honest. I am going to go with Josh Jacobs. And the reason is one, because he's a running back. So again, even though the wide receiver position and the passing game in general did balance out this year like we expected it might, the running backs are still scarce. They're still the more scarce position compared to wide receiver, and that's going to be true next year. It's going to be true probably for the next 10 years. And Josh Jacobs is a guy who probably had a disappointing season if you drafted him. He wasn't exactly the dude that you thought you were getting, but his volume was consistent. And I would say that most things that could have gone wrong for Josh Jacobs this year did. And that's one, the receivers that they drafted were not able to stay healthy. They weren't able to make a big contribution. And I think that changes next year. Let's not forget, again, they had no offseason. Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards, and Nelson Aguilar contributed, but they had no offseason. They had no chance to get acclimated to the NFL. And just because Justin Jefferson and Brandon Ayuk and T. Higgins didn't have a problem with it doesn't mean guys like Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Reagor and Henry Ruggs did. So I think that, combined with the fact that Richie Incognito missed a lot of the season, Rodney Hudson was banged up, Trent Brown was banged up, like their whole offensive line was hurt on and off all season. I think that contributed big time to Josh Jacobs. Not only that, he had the hardest schedule of any running back in the NFL this year, and that could change next year. Obviously, we'll get into more strength of schedule stuff next year, but I just don't think it's going to be as hard as it was for Josh Jacobs this year, for him, for the Raiders offense in general. And I think that Derek Carr is going to be the quarterback there. I don't think that changes, but either way, I think the situation for Josh Jacobs gets better and better as we go forward.
Yep. I'm most likely going to be a little lower on Jacobs simply because these 2 receivers I just couldn't pass on for him. But I understand, like, mid-type second-round pick, I'm fine with that given the volume that we expect, given the talent of the player here. And as you mentioned, he dealt with so much adversity this year and yet still put up a productive season. So I'm fine with the pick, but me personally, I can't pass on the boy Stephon Diggs. And if I'm going to talk about Stephon Diggs, buckle your seats because it's pretty damn exciting. We saw the Josh Allen leap everybody and their mothers were hoping for. I mean, the talent, it oozed this year. He's, in my opinion, the 3rd MVP candidate. I mean, you could obviously Mahomes and Rodgers, but what Allen has done this year has been insane. And he would not be able to do it to the degree he has been if not for his number 1 receiver, number 14, Stephon Diggs. I mean, if you guys were in your fantasy championships and you had Stephon Diggs, congratulations on the championship, just for the
Thank
record. There you go. I mean, 120 receptions, nearly 1,500 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns, and he hasn't even played his 16th game. That's just insane production for a guy who, in my opinion, we've said it all along, he was always more talented than the production he was putting up. He just wasn't in a conducive situation in Minnesota to be able to hit those ceilings. Well, guess what? In Buffalo, he's hitting those damn ceilings, and he's going through them.
Yeah, he literally had 94 targets last year. 94. Like Jerry Jeudy, for what it's worth, Jerry Jeudy, everyone thinks he's had a terrible rookie season. He has 105 targets. So what Stephon Diggs in terms of his volume was last year was absolutely criminally low compared to the talent that we all know he's super talented. We've seen it this year. We saw it before when he was in Minnesota, but for whatever reason last year, he just did not get the volume, and that was not the case in Buffalo, and that's what I cited going into the season as the reason he was going to be good this year. And the reason I said before the season, I was like, hey, the NFL season kicks off tomorrow. What are your guys' final bold predictions? I'm like, Stephon Diggs is finishing wide receiver, top 5 wide receiver. He's wide receiver 3 on the season. So I think I nailed that one. I have no problems with the pick at the first pick of the second round, second pick of the second round.
Yep.
I'm going to go with the other receiver that you mentioned at the 2.3 here, and I'm going to go with DK Metcalf. Again, similar to guys like Tyreek Hill and guys like Devontae Adams, you just want a safe option. And a safe option to me is a guy who's tied to Russell Wilson. And that's what DK Metcalf is. We saw him take the leap. We saw him break out in his second season. He's a physical freak, and sometimes playing backyard football is the same as playing fantasy football. Just get the biggest, fastest, strongest guy on your team, and you're going to probably do well.
Yep. No, I fully agree. I mean, heck, I told you I considered him with the Stephon Diggs pick. DK Metcalf is absolutely deserving of this spot. What we've seen from him and Russell Wilson in terms of the chemistry this year has been insane. I mean, you're talking about a guy who, in any given season, in my opinion, which DK Metcalf could be, have 15, 18 receiving touchdowns in any given year.
And he had 10 this year.
Yeah. As a second-year receiver, despite the low volume we're seeing, despite having Tyler Lockett on the other side, like obviously those factors can still be at hand for next year, but we're going to see DK Metcalf take that next step as a receiver. He's not going to be phased out of some games as kind of what we saw this year, but I'm telling you, when that guy is on, and that guy is winning you a week. Because
and we talked about the limited offseason for rookies. It's a big deal for second-year players too, because coming off of your rookie season, in your rookie year, you didn't get like OTAs, like they got OTAs in training camp and all that kind of stuff. But what they didn't get was that second year where they don't have to go through the combine in April. They have an off season to just chill and relax and work out with their teammates and all that kind of stuff. And that's something that DK Metcalf and AJ Brown and Terry McLaurin, all those guys didn't get, and they still performed despite that. So I think that could be a boost for them going into their third year.
For sure. Absolutely love the pick. My next pick is actually going to be another receiver, little receiver run here. And a guy who's arguably, in my opinion, I mean, I personally would take Devontae Adams as the best overall receiver in the league. But this guy's got a really good case for it too. And that's going to be DeAndre Hopkins, number 1 wide receiver from the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, people think he's having a quote unquote down year, I guess. I don't know, because the Cardinals are 8-7. Kyler Murray's kind of been like lower recently than he was at the beginning of the season, but this is still a 1,400 yard and 6 touchdown receiver this year, despite being in his first year in the offense. Like we talk about how impressive Stephon Diggs has been on the Bills. DeAndre Hopkins has been not as impressive, but very impressive in his own right on the Arizona Cardinals in his first year. I think next year, another year with the Kyler Murray, another year under Cliff Kingsbury's system, we could absolutely see an explosion again from DeAndre Hopkins. This is a guy capable of 1,600 yards, double-digit touchdowns. Only 6 touchdowns this year. Expect that number to absolutely see some touchdown positive regression for next year. I don't expect him to be even under the 9-10 type touchdown mark, considering how frequently this team is going to be passing the ball, how frequently he's going to be getting the targets of the team. I mean, are you really going to trust Christian Kirk, Dan Arnold, Kenyon Drake over him? No, you're going to get the ball into the hands of your playmaker, and that's DeAndre Hopkins. So I absolutely love DeAndre Hopkins, and the fact that he's going to be a top 6 receiver this year and he's completely going under the radar is insane to me because of the level of talent that he presents on any given game, on any given moment, any given season. A lot of words there. Give Bush a second. He can clear.
All right. So into the next guy that we're talking about. So this is about the range that we'd be talking about Travis Etienne or Najee Harris or someone like that. We're not talking about rookies because we don't know where they're going. So just ignore that for now in this kind of situation. But a guy that was a rookie this year that I would say is probably up for a pick right now is Antonio Gibson. I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Antonio Gibson, you can make a case that he probably should have been off the board like 5-6 picks ago, but we don't know what his situation is going to be. So that's kind of keeping him down a little bit. We assume he's going to get a new quarterback. We don't know if it's going to be a veteran, if it's going to be a rookie, if they're going to be productive or not. So I think Antonio Gibson, because of his situation, has to be behind guys like Aaron Jones and like Austin Eckler, who we know their situation is favorable. But I do think Antonio Gibson, despite his situation this year, can only get better going forward.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Again, he was going to be my next running back off the board. I just couldn't pass on a guy like DeAndre Hopkins at the middle of the second round. I mean, the value there was way too much. But look, when you're talking about Antonio Gibson as a raw rookie going in the third round into an ambiguous backfield this offseason, he's just been
didn't even play running back in college.
Like he was a wide receiver flex type, if you will, in college. And you see this guy step in as the RB1 for the Washington football team. Double-digit touchdowns. You're seeing what he's going to, like, the natural receiving ability that he's had. Yes, that's kind of been limited by McKissick, but I'm telling you, if he gets a chance next year to contribute more in the receiving game, this is a former college wide receiver. He should have absolutely no problem acclimating himself into that role, hopefully with an improved quarterback situation, because Alex Smith is not going to be the starter next year. Dwayne Haskins already cut. Kyle Allen, if he's starting for the Washington football team next year, I'm going to eat my hair, to be honest, because that's how ridiculous that is. So peg them in for a rookie quarterback, peg them in for a Jameis Winston. And if that's the case, I mean, Gibson, middle of the second round, we're going to look back at it in August as just being absurd. So I absolutely love the pick. I think it was the proper, correct pick here. And I was going to pick him with the next pick. So cheers on you.
Yeah.
Next guy I'm actually going to be taking here is I'm actually having a tough one. Again, we're doing this live if you guys couldn't tell. So I'm just kind of thinking about it on the spot. And based off what we know now, based off the usage we were seeing at the end of the season, this is a spot where I'm fine taking another rookie running back if you can guess who it is.
You gonna take Clyde here?
No, the other one.
You gonna take Swift?
All right, so the next pick is actually going to be DeAndre Swift off the board here. I mean, we saw what this guy was able to do. Ambiguous backfield throughout the season. Matt Patricia, well, when those factors got eliminated, we saw this guy absolutely blossom down the stretch into the lead back. We were all projecting him coming out of Georgia. I mean, the talent is oozing here. Proved way more this year than even Miles Sanders did his previous year. And Miles Sanders is a first-round pick going into last year's drafts. So why wouldn't DeAndre Swift get that type of recognition?
Yeah, I don't disagree with the pick. I actually personally would have went with two other rookies before I went with DeAndre Swift, just because of the situation changing. And one of those rookies is my next pick, and it's Justin Jefferson. I'm taking Justin Jefferson this high, and I'm not even thinking twice about it. Why? Because Justin Jefferson has had an Odell Beckham-like rookie season. And Odell Beckham in 2015, 2016, even 2017, before he broke his ankles or whatever, he was a wide receiver, like the top of the board in terms of wide receiver position in fantasy. It was him, Antonio Brown, those kind of guys were just getting target volume. They were scoring touchdowns. That is what Justin Jefferson can be next year when he has a full offseason, when he has a full time to work with Kirk Cousins and all that kind of stuff. I don't think Justin Jefferson being picked this high is completely out of the realm of possibility, and I think he deserves to go this high.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely fine with the pick. Again, this is a guy who's probably going to end up settling in the third, fourth round area in ADP, which is just going to be an absolutely absurd value. Again,
so if you take his splits, I heard someone say this already, but if you take his splits from when he became a full-time starter and you pace out his numbers, he has like a 1,400 yard and 9 touchdown season, which is basically better than what DeAndre Hopkins has done this year.
Yeah, which is insane to me. But I fully like the pick. I fully think he's deserving of the spot. And that actually segues into my next pick. And you know what? I'm gonna go with Calvin Ridley. I know it's tough.
I considered taking him over.
I know it's tough. Julio Jones is there. That's going to be the general narrative around it. But let me tell you, Julio Jones on the field, Julio Jones off the field. Calvin Ridley is a bona fide stud, bona fide top 10 receiver in the league, in my opinion. What this guy does, okay, we always talked about who's going to have that Chris Godwin type season going into next year. The main answer was Calvin Ridley. Well, let me tell you, what he did was even better than what Chris Godwin did 2 years ago. And that's coming from a guy who absolutely loves Chris Godwin's game. I mean, 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns this year was ridiculous, considering that he's missed time as well. We've seen him perform, as I mentioned, with and without Julio Jones. I think the quarterback situation may be a quote unquote question mark because we don't know what's going to happen with Matt Ryan. But Matt Ryan is an Atlanta Falcon as of today. And if Matt Ryan's an Atlanta Falcon going into next year, I'm fully capable and fully fine with taking Calvin Ridley at the end of the second round, which is what the value is here. Now, we mentioned this is a dynamic receiver who, if he plays a full 16, is basically a lock for 10 plus touchdowns in any given year. I mean, you can't ask for much more from an end of the second round pick. I mean, we were talking about a guy like this with this type of production going at the early part of the second round just last year. This is a guy who shouldn't be falling, but because of the depth of the position, because of the overall upside at some of the running backs, I'm able to get him here, and I'm absolutely stoked about it. So lock in Calvin Ridley. Fine with it. What are your thoughts on Calvin Ridley?
I have no qualms with the pick. He was literally who I was choosing between him and Jefferson. I was just like, you know what, who do I trust more? I trust Jefferson a little bit more just because I've seen him do it as a rookie and like in the probably worst circumstances he could have had. So that's why I trust Jefferson a little bit more. But Calvin Ridley, I have no qualms with that pick at all. Here's a guy I'm probably going to be picking higher than most people, and that's Cam Akers. That's the next pick I'm making right now. And the reason I'm picking Cam Akers is because the usage he's seeing is what Todd Gurley saw in 2017 and 2018 when he was the RB1 and all that kind of stuff. I don't think Darrell Henderson's going away. I think Malcolm Brown's going away. I don't think Darrell Henderson's going away. I think he's going to be involved to some degree. But what Cam Akers showed in the past couple of games that he's played and when he's been fully healthy is that he is a lead dog. He's the lead back. He's the lead back for an offense that is called by Sean McVay, who is a great play caller. He is a lead back for an offense who has an efficient quarterback who has two great receivers on the outside to take attention away from him. And I think Cam Akers, because of his situation and because of the volume that we've seen out of him, because of the talent that he's shown on the field, deserves to be a back end of the second round pick.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's a fine pick there. I personally probably would have preferred like even like a Dobbins or a Sanders, but like that's a clear tier of 3 in my opinion. Like for the next type of pick in terms of upside.
I think there's one other guy in that tier. You might not agree with me, but I think there's one other guy in that tier.
Mention him. Let's debate it.
Clyde. I think Clyde's in that tier too.
Oh yeah. No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think
depending on where ETN and Harris and stuff go, they're probably either ahead of these guys or in the same tier as them.
I absolutely agree there. So I'm definitely fine with the pick. I think I probably would have been more comfortable as my 3rd overall drafted player. But in reality here, if we hear everything leading up in the season, which is what we expected, which is what is expected based off what we've seen at the end of this year, he's going to be in this area, and I'm perfectly fine with it because this is a talented back who was showing 20 touch per game type upside down the stretch. So I'm fine with it. The guy I'm going to mention is actually going to be a guy who's only played in 7 games this year. And I mentioned the amount of positional advantage that Travis Kelce gives over any other tight end. Well, there's 2 other guys in that tier, or the tier under, and that's going to be George Kittle and Darren Waller. Picking between them's tough. So I'm gonna take, in my opinion, is a better overall player. I'm gonna take George Kittle. I expect fully Darren Waller to be gone within these next couple of picks, but just touching upon what George Kittle gives you. Okay, he was averaging 81 yards per game and 2 touchdowns in the 7 games he played. Yes, him only playing 7 games is a major, if you will, concern, considering that he has shown a propensity to miss games in his career. But let me tell you, when this guy is on the field, the absolute advantage that he gives you at the tight end position is unheard of after Travis Kelce. So yes, Darren Waller is close consideration here, but I just think if we're getting a full 16 games out of George Kittle, expect that 1,400 receiving yards. And if he has any type of touchdown regression or positive touchdown regression, like this guy is going to have, not similar to what Travis Kelce this year did, but in the other tight end 1 seasons, we could absolutely see George Kittle kind of near that type of production. So I'm fine with that. And at the end of the second round, getting that type of advantage, I think is crucial. So George Kittle, lock it in.
Yep. I don't disagree with the pick. I think he belongs here. I don't think Darren Waller does. I'm going to make that clear. I don't think Darren Waller belongs in the second round. I don't even think he belongs in the early part of the 3rd round personally, because if you look at points per game, what Darren Waller is giving you is about equivalent to what Robert Woods is giving you in terms of wide receiver production. So I know it's an advantage at the tight end position to have Darren Waller as opposed to someone like Robert Tonyan or something like that. But what Darren Waller does is not valuable enough to the point that Kittle does it, and then to an even greater point that Kelce does it, for me to want to take him this early. I think he's going to be a 4th round pick if I had to guess, and I think that's probably where he belongs.
That's fair.
The next guy I'm going to talk about, you already talked about him, is Miles Sanders. I'm not taking J.K. Dobbins yet. And the reason I'm not taking J.K. Dobbins yet is because I don't think J.K. Dobbins is a sure bet to be a feature back based on the tendencies of the coaching staff, based on the production that Gus Edwards has shown. I don't think J.K. Dobbins deserves to be a second round pick. I think he's a guy that needs to go in the third round, and I think I'm comfortable taking him there. But if he is a second round pick, I don't know if I'm going to be all the way in, even though I believe in how good of a player he is, and I think he has a good chance to take over that backfield. I just the situation. Plus, you have Lamar taking all those carries himself. Like it's just not a situation that I think J.K. Dobbins can be a RB1 type in. I think he could be a top 8 running back, a top 12 running back, but I don't see a world where J.K. Dobbins finishes as an RB, as like a top 4 RB next year. So I'm going to go with Miles Sanders, who I think Jalen Hurts kind of has the same similar tendencies to Lamar in terms of the fact that he's going to run, but I think that offense is much, much better next year than it was this year. And I think for that reason, I'm going to take Miles Sanders to the back of the second round.
Yeah, definitely fair. Again, I mentioned like he was a close consideration for me as well. Anyways, that actually leads to our last pick. We're going to do it 2 rounds because we're kind of cutting a little close on time here. But the final pick of this 2-round mock, it's going to be a guy that was the consensus wide receiver 1 amongst the industry last year.
Really? You're going to pick Michael Thomas here?
I'm picking Michael Thomas at the end of the second round. I mean, the volume is just way too much. Again, this is assuming Drew Brees is back next year. Like if Taysom Hill is named the quarterback or Drew Brees retires or whatever like that, obviously this pick is subject to change. But assuming that Drew Brees is back.
Kamara pick for the record. So is the Kamara pick if Drew Brees isn't back.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So expecting Drew Brees back for a full 16 games next year. This is still a guy who 2 years ago broke the league record in receptions, 1,800-yard season. I mean, this is still one of the top 6 or 7 talents at the position. We can make that type of claim. What are you thinking there?
Yeah, I would say about that.
Yeah, and the overall usage that he sees in the offense when he is on the field, this is a 10, 12, 13 type target every single game, book it in, lock it in type usage that he sees when Drew Brees is on the field. Now, when Taysom Hill's on the field and he's fucking taking those goal line carries and not throwing the ball to the degree that Brees does, like, okay. But we saw Michael Thomas splits when Drew Brees on the field, even this year, was really good. Last year, obviously record breaking. And the fact that you're getting a 1.5 round basically discount from where he was going last year, it's just absurd to me. So I'm absolutely fine with rounding out the second round with a guy who won leagues 2 years ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. A couple honorable mentions I want to talk about. I think there's a massive cluster of receivers that we could have gone with in any order. Namely, I think Amari Cooper, if Dak Prescott is on the field, deserves to be in this conversation because what he did when Dak was on the field and even what he did when Dalton was the quarterback, he actually proved to be a lot safer of an option than he's been in his entire career. And I'll take that one on the chin because I didn't think he could change all that much. If Dak Prescott plays 16 games, I think Amari Cooper's a locked and loaded top 10 receiver.
Yes,
another guy, speaking of his quarterback and him having a connection, Will Fuller deserves to be in this conversation, in my opinion. I think Will Fuller, the way he played was, I mean, he was top 6 receiver in points per game when he was on the field, and Deshaun Watson and him, the offense can only get better. It was a very bad situation for both of those guys this year. I think Will Fuller gets franchise tagged, probably. Maybe he gets re-signed, I don't know, but he's a free agent this year, and I think he's probably playing on the tag next year. I think Will Fuller deserves to be in this conversation. Lastly, the one guy I want to talk about is Keenan Allen, based on his target volume that we saw with, and probably Allen Robinson too. These two guys both deserve to be in this conversation based on the target volume they've seen. Their situations are very clear for me. I think Allen Robinson, there's no chance he's leaving Chicago, in my opinion. And I think Keenan Allen has Justin Herbert as his quarterback who can only go up in terms of his production. So I think those guys, I think the running backs may be a little bit too rich for my blood with Clyde and with J.K. Dobbins and with other guy, David Montgomery and guys like that. I think they deserve to be after that cluster of receivers. Mixon, yeah. I think those guys deserve to be after that cluster of receivers. I don't know if I would take those guys who have a lot of question marks over receivers who I don't really have that many question marks about.
Yeah. The guys I'm going to mention as honorable mention at the cluster receivers. You mentioned that cluster. This just to show how deep the position is. Terry McLaurin, Julio Jones,
Kenny Golladay, Mike Evans. There's so many of them. Chris Godwin, even too. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, like
Brandon Ayuk, CeeDee Lamb, like
D Higgins. Yeah, like it's just ridiculous. We can't get all of these guys in the first 2 rounds, and I think where we drafted Justin Jefferson is not where he's going to go. I think he's going to go in that cluster with the guys that we just mentioned. But yeah, this as it stands right now, of course, there's going to be injuries and things that deter away from it. This is looking like a very, very deep top of the draft for fantasy next year.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Hopefully you guys are enjoying and you made it this far in the video. If you made it this far in the video, comment FSE. Comment FSC. Just let us know that you made it this far. You're enjoying the video. You're enjoying the content. And as always, make sure you like it up. Helps a ton with the YouTube algorithm. And if you're new to the channel, this is the first video you've ever seen of us, make sure you go hit that subscribe button. Heck, you decide later you don't want to watch anymore. Cool beans. Give it a chance, though. I am sure you will enjoy regardless. Anyways, this is Bush and Danny. Peace out, y'all.